Hello guys, this is Fireside Chess coming back to you with another YouTube video. Today, we're going to be going over pins. This is going to be the beginning of our tactics course here on the channel. And always remember to hit the like button and subscribe. So without further ado, let's get started. So since this is a tactics course, I think that we should take the time to fully understand what is a tactic. So to define a tactic is a move or a sequence of moves designed to achieve a short-term goal. The most common goals are to capture your opponent's pieces and to give checkmate. So that's pretty much just in simple what a tactic is. Now let's define a pin. A pin is when you use your pieces to attack your opponent's lesser piece, but if that lesser piece were to move, a higher value piece behind it would end up being in danger, which then ends up forcing the lesser value piece to be unable to move. So now let's get started. So here we have the pin. This is a very good example of a pin. This happens lots of times during the opening. We're pinning this knight on f6 to this queen on d8. And now see, with our definition of a pin, we are using our piece, our white bishop, to attack this black's knight. But if black's knight were to move, we easily win the queen. Now, let's go on with the bishop pins. Now, there are two types of pins. One type of pin is an absolute pin, like this one. An absolute pin is when you pin a piece, for example, this knight on e5, to the king. And here we have our bishop pinning this knight to the king. Alright. And one thing that we can do when we try to find tactics like this, like pins or even skewers, which we'll touch upon in a later video, we want to look at all of our pieces, especially in the endgame, and try to think of all the different moves that they have. Because this bishop could even come to h2, also attacking the knight, but we don't get anything good out of this. The knight simply moves away, and nothing happens. Knight just gets away. So that's why we also need to check every single one of our moves. We have to check d4, e3, and so on. Now, here's another bishop pin. Let's try to find the pin here. So, we have 3 pawns. We can easily assume that these pawns aren't going to do anything because they're not in an easy position to attack. Right? So now, let's check our other pieces. We have a rook, a bishop, and a queen. So now, even before we check all of these different pieces, let's try to find possible places for a pin. We do see along this long diagonal from a1 to h8 that this rook is in front of the queen. So if we can somehow get any of our pieces onto this long diagonal on d4, c3, b2, or a1, then we're going to have an easy pin. And luckily for us, we have bishop to c3, easily just pinning the rook to the queen. And yeah, the rook to the queen. Now this rook, it's vulnerable to capture, but it can't move because then black would lose the queen. Now going on to one more bishop pin. Let's try to find the pin here. It's white to play, set up an absolute pin. An absolute pin, again, is when we pin any piece to the king. And now, I did say earlier that there are 2 types of pins. The other kind of pin is a relative pin. It's when we pin a piece to another higher value piece. We see this here. Set up a relative pin, white to move. We're pinning this rook to the queen. We do see that it's still following the rules of pins, we're attacking the rook, and behind it, it's the higher value piece of the queen. So now we come back to number 5. White to play set up the absolute pin. Here, our absolute pin is bishop to a3. We're attacking the rook, and then the king. The rook can't even move here, according to Lichess, because it becomes an illegal move. We're deliberately putting the black king in danger if black were to move the rook, and that becomes an illegal move. Our last bishop pin puzzle. The black queen is placed in front of the king. How can white pin the black queen? The white bishop pins the black queen on d4. The queen can now no longer escape, because if it moves, that puts the king in check, which is an illegal move. So then black's best move is just to take on d4, because black might as well get some material while the queen is dying. And we just take the queen back. It is an exchange up because it was a bishop for a queen. Now, on to rook pins. Rook pins are similar to bishop pins, but they're not the same, because obviously they're not pinning on diagonals. Now they're pinning on files and ranks. And now here, the pin already exists. We're pinning the black bishop to the black king. This is an absolute pin. Let's go to the last rook pin. Now, it's white to move. There are many different moves here, but the best one is rook to e1. Because remember, again, we want to look at all of our minor pieces and our major pieces. Our minor pieces, we know they can't do much. This bishop is trapped behind our d2 and b2 pawns. Knights aren't good for pinning because they can only really attack one square at a time. They don't really go in like lines like this. And this bishop is in no position to pin. Even though it could technically pin the c6 pawn, it's easily countered. So then, with only leaving us with a couple more options, we have queen to e1, which is a pin. It's not very good though, because we can accomplish the same thing simply by just moving our rook. You see, we're attacking this knight and the king behind it, and then the best move for black is f6, but then you might think, oh no, now we can't do anything. But we can just play f4, and this is attacking the knight. And the knight can no longer move, so this ends up being good for us. But even instead of f6, after f6, there's even better options for us. Well, there is knight to c3, and then after bishop to e7, we have d4, and then a knight to g6. This follows our opening principle is better because we are just developing our pieces. But then the better option is d4, because we all know that try to avoid moving your f pawn as much as possible, because that always gives easy access to the king, especially if the king is castled on the king's side. Keep going. Now we have queen pins. White pins the knight to the rook, and black has to lose a piece here, because we know that here there's no way black can defend this knight, because the queen can't get over there, and if this knight moves away, then the rook would die. Okay, now let's see. White pins the rook to the king and threatens to play b5. So as we can see here, we have this pin, the rook to the king, and then the threat here is b5. Because as you can see, you can just easily take on c6. And then black can play h5. It's not going to affect much. We can just take here, or you could even take with the queen, and that even cuts off most of the king's escape squares. Then after pawn takes on c6, king comes to b8. But even now, there's still multiple options. Like after bishop to c6, there can still be king to c8, and then queen to a8 check, e8 check, mate, and then after king to a8, same story, queen to e8 checkmate, and a6. This one is very interesting because now white is forcing his king out into the open and closer towards white's pieces. And now the way to punish this is just by simply playing queen to c4. If black comes here, we bring queen to b8 checkmate. If black tries to put the pawn in the way, we still have queen takes on b5 checkmate. And now there's many different variations, but they all end up in checkmate or in a drastic material gain. And now this is a very long study, but let's only go over a couple here. So now we have exploit the pins, power of pins. Now we see, since we're exploiting the pin, we already have our pin set up for us. Very nice. We're pinning this knight here on e5 to the king on e8. Now simply, we just play f4 because now black can't even move the knight because it becomes an illegal move. Black has many options. All of them just result in white taking on e5. And if black takes back, white takes. We're up a rook. So let's do a couple more. We have white to move, use your knowledge of pins to win a piece. So as we can see here, there's multiple options. One is e5, and then knight to d5. Nothing much happens here. But then the best option here is to play bishop takes on f6. Because now black can't take this pawn because it's being pinned by the queen. So then black has to move g6 to avoid the checkmate. And now we can easily try to set up a kiss of death checkmate by playing queen to g5. And now this is almost an unstoppable checkmate. We have more exploiting the pins. We have white to move, use your knowledge of pins to win a pawn. This is from Magnus Carlsen versus, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that guy's name. So here our main line is rook takes on e6 check, rook takes on e6, rook takes e6, king takes e6. This isn't very good, seeing as we just lost a piece. So then let's try to look through our different lines. We have b3, not doing much, but then knight to f4. This threatens the rook. That's on e2. There's many responses to that also. But then instead of knight to f4, there's also knight to g6, simply just defending the rook on e8. And then there's rook takes e8, rook takes e8, rook takes e8, knight takes e8, and then that's just very simple. And there's another line. We have knight takes on g5. We take the pawn here. Into that, we take the pawn there. If black takes, we take, takes, and takes. Simple material gain. And then, as we can see, here are different lines. All of them will just end up in the same end most of the time. Now we have black to play. You must be careful when a piece is pinned. Your opponent may bring added pressure, as in this example. So there's d5, simply just defending the knight, but now we just play pawn to d5, d3. And then now we just win the knight. But there's even better defenses. Here we have bishop to f5. It's not much better than d3, because now sorry, not d3. It's not much better than d5 because we can just play d3. The better defense here is queen to e7 because this completely ends the pin on the e4 knight. Because now, even if the knight moves away, the queen is there to defend from check. As we can see, in d3, knight to f6, and all is well. Even if takes, nothing much has happened to black. Just it was a queen trade. So now, that's going to wrap it up for today's video, which is just an intro to pins. As always, just remember to like and subscribe, and share this video with others so they can also get better at chess. Bye guys, and Merry belated Christmas. Stay safe.